Folks, I'm Darrell Jackson with the Ark-La-Tex Sportsman. We're here at Gander Mountain this morning to do a food plot seminar with a friend of ours, and a nice young lady that's been with Texas Parks and Wildlife now for about 3 years.
That's right.
And she is very knowledgeable on the food plots, and we hope the timing is right and it gets out there and helps some of you. So what I'd like to do is turn this over to Penny Wilkerson, and she's a lovely young lady, and she's going to explain the project so you guys can understand it. If you have any questions later on, just send us an email or something and we'll get Penny to answer them.
Well, I wanted to hopefully give you guys a little bit of information about food plots. It's really timely right about this time of year. It's a really good time to start getting your food plots out. You really need to get them in. They're fall food plots. Get them in by September the 15th. But really the first thing, the most important thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is to think about food plots not as a standalone, but really as something that supplements what you already have. So when I go out and look at a piece of property with a landowner, what I'm looking for is native habitat. And habitat is not just food, but it's water, it's a place to raise your young, and it's also shelter. So when you look at your property, don't just think about where can I put a food plot. You want to think about that habitat in its entirety and think about what's there and what's not there. But if you do have or you don't have some food out there, and especially in July and August, this time of year when you know those animals are going to be stressed, then maybe you can think about putting in a food plot, because those times of year and in February when it's getting dry and cold, you want to put something in so that you can make sure that your deer can be carried through those really tough times in the season. But that's one thing to think about. Think of it as a supplement. Don't think of food plots as something that are just going to do wonders for your deer herd, because, like I said, it's really more about habitat. That's the first thing that you should look at. But when we talk about food plots, and food plots are a great thing that you can do, and your time and energy that you put into them and the money you put into them is really up to you. But it just takes, it's kind of a labor of love. It just takes putting your heart and soul into it to get something good out of it. And you kind of have to think like a farmer. That's one thing about wildlife biology, is you are producing a product, which in turn is a deer.
But you know, as a hunter, and I'm a hunter, or try to be. I hadn't hunted much lately because I'm always with someone else. But we put them in as deer attractants, but we ought to actually be putting them in as a deer supplement. Think about our spring food plots and our winter food plots. But that way, we have our deer there, we have more mature deer, the racks are doing better if we put the right amount of seeds with protein in them. So it's not, this shouldn't be put in just as an attractant. It ought to be put in as a supplement to the animals.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that folks don't really think about. They think about putting corn out during the hunting season and having their corn there, or putting their food plot so that it can get through the end of hunting season. But really, you know, your animals are in the most time of nutritional stress after hunting season. So if you really want to do something good for your deer herd and improve the deer herd, then you want to think about food plots both in the summer and in the winter, and think about it in terms of helping the deer herd.
Well, the spring food plots, if you put out seeds that have a lot of protein in them, you'll have better antler growth. Is that correct?
That is, really, that's what happens. Usually, of course, any animal in the wild is going to go to what they're evolved with first. They're going to go to that native vegetation that they know is tender and succulent. And that is one thing that I wanted to talk about too, is what deer eat. What we talk about in the wildlife profession are grazers versus browsers. And this is a good example of what deer love. And this is a persimmon, and of course you've got that really soft mast. Persimmon, and everybody knows deer love acorns, so oak trees, and then you've got anything that produces a soft fruit like blackberries and dewberries. And even I've got some handy dandy poke salad over here. It's not got berries yet, but everybody knows that deer love it, and of course it's beginning to wilt because I got it early this morning, but you can see where the berries would come on a little bit later this summer, and they love those. And not only do they love these berries, but in the springtime, they're going to take the very ends of these stems and eat those little leaf buds. And that's what we mean by browsers, because if you want to talk about browsers and grazers, just take the cow and the deer, for example. Cows, they eat pretty much everything that is there, and they have a really large stomach, and they have a large microbial community that's in there. And so you have little microscopic bugs in your stomach if you're a cow, and you can eat anything you want, and it doesn't matter how woody it is or how much how grassy it is. And basically a grass, because they have to stand up on their own, has a lot of kind of hard stuff inside their cell walls of the plant, and that makes it hard to digest. And for deer, who's got a relatively small stomach compared to a cow, they need this stuff that's high in protein and really digestible, and doesn't have that really hard woody lignin inside their cell walls. So that's what we have to think about, is stuff that anybody else would call a weed. A forb and this browse, and also soft mast, hard and soft mast, is really what you need to focus on when you're talking about deer. You need to know what they eat before you can try and work on a food plot. So that's one thing to consider, is, you know, what the deer are eating on your place.
Well, there are so many different kinds out on the market now that it's hard to choose. Yeah. What we have gathered up here is would be a common blend right here for a food plot.
It is. And really, before you start thinking about what to put in your food plot, think about where your food plot is. The most important thing is site selection. So you want to know what your soils are. And you also want to know how wet is that site. Does it get shade? Is there going to be direct sunlight on it? Or is it going to get really hot? So if you think about a bottomland site near a creek that's got really clay soils that hold the water, then you want to think about what can tolerate that wetness on its little roots all the time. And you also want to think about, well, that's probably a clay soil. And that's one thing that comes into terms next.
Well, Penny, let's take a short break and we'll be right back to you, folks.